All right, we're in Revelation chapter 8. The cat agrees. There wasn't anything to disagree about, cat. All right, chapter 8. Let's do a quick review. 1's the introduction, 2 and 3 are the epistles to the churches. Number 4 is when John is taken up into heaven. Number 5 is when we see the lamb that had been slain and the scrolls. Number 6 is when the seals on the lamb had been slain in the scroll. I trimmed my mustache. I got a piece of beard hair in my eye. I think that's what it is. Number 6 is when the scrolls are opened. Number 7, and that's also the wrath of God is being poured out in the scrolls. Remember, Revelation isn't linear. And then after that, we have number 7. We have number 7, where the 12,000 from each tribe are sealed rather, and then we have the white robes for the martyrs, which may be just from the tribulation/wrath time. I tend to think that it's martyrs from the whole world. I'm not sure, but it's the sea has to give up their dead, and let's see. Oh, and we had that funny moment where the elder asks John, "Who are these people?" And John's like, what? You tell me," which I think is very funny. But and he's the one who says, "They are they which came out of great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." So definitely this will include people in the last times. I don't know if it includes martyrs previous to the first rapture or not. It might. There's a white throne judgment, and there's a delineation of judgments later on. And it's a subject of much controversy. I think the answers are in Scripture. Scripture is a literary fractal. That means you can't get to the end of it. All you can do is find out that when you thought you knew something, it was just a doorway into deeper meaning. There is no end to Scripture. Anybody who tells you they fully understand it is either conceited or a liar or some combination of the two. Nobody will ever fully understand it. It's too deep. It's like saying you can fully understand the universe. It's as deep as that. I mean, this is talking about the artist who made the universe, for goodness sake. The universe is subservient to the Creator because the Creator created it. This book is describing what the painting is and was written by the painter. So it's comparable to the painting. It's interesting to think about. Sort of like how coastline is a fractal. Coastline is essentially infinite because it goes in and out and in and out and in and out. And if you measured each little bit, it would actually be longer than the length of the coastline because it does all that stuff, right? Well, this is a sort of philosophical paradox in the same vein. All right, chapter 8. And when he had opened the 7th seal, so this is just the first 6 seals, is the 4 horsemen, the 5th that's talking to the martyrs, the 6th seal. Where was it? The 6th seal is when there's the earthquake, and it looks like, I think this might be later on. It says a mountain was thrown into the sea. A mountain was thrown into the sea. So, and then we have this whole chapter about 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth holding the wind. And God says, "Hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads." Then you have the 12,000 who were sealed. Okay, chapter 8. And when he had opened 12,000 from each tribe, 144,000 total. And when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And all the dads know the joke, so I'm not going to rehash it. Verse 2. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets, 7 spirits, 7 angels, 7 eyes on the Lamb, 7 candles, 7 stars, 7 trumpets. That's 6 sevens. I'll bet you there's another 7 coming. And another, I don't know, I'm just shooting from the hip on that. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, not censor, C-E-N-S-E-R, with the smoke coming out of it, incense and whatnot. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. The vials were the prayers of the saints, and also the incense. And the smoke of the incense, with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. It's a very interesting metaphor for prayer. And again, we have to wonder, Is this directly literal? Is it a description of how things happen metaphysically from a perspective of someone who's ephemeral and not yet eternal? Is it pure poetry? I'm not sure. John saw it, and I think he saw it. And you can see that from that little joking part in chapter 7, where he says, "And one of the elders answered, saying unto me, What are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? And I said unto him, Sir, you know." And he'd say, "Hey, who are these guys?" John's like, "You brought me here. I don't." Now that's the reaction of somebody actually seeing something and being in the midst of what he doesn't understand in a sense that to him at least appears physical, even if it's just in his mind. He's not just he's not sitting on a couch farting out ideas. That's just not what's going on here. So it's just important. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar. This is interesting. So the smoke of the incense, he's got a censer, and he's been given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints. They're poured out on the vial, from the vials. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And so after this, the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So you see here what's happening in the Holy of Holies in the heavenly realm looks like a censer that's been filled with fire and cast over something. Whereas on earth, we're like, oh my gosh, it's a meteor shower. There's thunderings, there's voices. So there's some difference in scale between the ephemeral reality we inhabit and the actual eternal reality God inhabits. So whether or not this is metaphorical, there is a difference in scale, and we're seeing it here. And eventually, I think it might be in 9, but it might be the end of this chapter, we're going to transition to the perspective from the earth. Verse 6, "And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound." And like the seals, we're going to have 7 sounding trumpets, and each of them. And again, notice this is after the 7th seal. This is the 7th seal being opened. The 7th seal opens 7 trumpets. Before that, you had the 6 seals, which were the 4 horsemen, the martyrs, the mountain being thrown into the sea, or whatever caused the sun to be a sackcloth and ashes and caused a big earthquake, which to me seems like an asteroid or something. And it does talk about that. Could be 2 separate events, but I think they're the same event. And then you get to this part where each time an angel sounds, something else is going to happen. So, verse 7, "The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up." Now, a lot of people think that has to do with some sort of nuclear exchange. I don't. And the reason is, though Revelation isn't linear, this perspective of the events from heaven has already talked about all the stars falling, and the earth could be moved out of its place. That could be the metaphysical relationship between the eternal nature of the stars and the earth. I don't know exactly what that is, but you've had things happen already. The saints who've gone through tribulation, probably been martyred, being given their white robes, the earthquake, the 4 horsemen. If there was going to be a nuclear exchange, it would probably be during the war horsemen. So this here, where everything was burnt up, hail and fire mingled with blood, it strikes me as the power of God in some way. And if you know how hail works, a storm will come through, say, a quarry with a bunch of gravel. It'll pick up that gravel, and that gravel will go high into the stratosphere, and it'll accrete ice around it until it becomes a sphere. And the bigger the little piece in the middle, the bigger the nucleus around which the ice grows, the bigger the hailstone. So when it says, hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, whatever's happened, and remember, the angels were holding the wind back. Now the wind's not held back anymore. The winds were held back until the 12,000 were sealed from each tribe, which is 144,000 total. It's not the Jehovah's Witness. But now the storm has come and picked up all the debris and destruction from the first 6 seals. And now it's raining down, so that makes sense that there'd be blood and hail. The fire element I don't fully understand. Could be supernatural. Could hearken to volcanic activity. Like when Mount St. Helens blew. There could be some of that going on, which would make sense if the Earth got hit by a meteor or a comet or a asteroid or something. Verse 8. Yeah, I agree, Kitty. She doesn't like this. Verse 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. Okay, so I might have that backward. That might be two events. Because it seems like the earthquake comes, and then a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And that sounds like a meteor or an asteroid or something. So it's going to hit the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. That probably means most of the critters are going to die, and whoever is in the sea. And if you imagine, if it hits a third part of the sea, I mean, you know how big the oceans are. I mean, that's going to be some tidal waves. That's going to topple some ships. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So yeah, probably a third part of the sea became blood because a third of all the creatures and ships died. That's probably a big part of that. So that's angel number 2. Angel number 3. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. Now this is very interesting. This is another thing where there's some nuclear thing. So you have an earthquake. So I thought the earthquake was caused, I thought later on, I'm going from the hip here. I thought later on the mountain being thrown into the sea was when the perspective shifted to the earth. But now it looks very much as though there's an earthquake from the sixth seal, and there's a mountain thrown into the sea during the second trumpet. And then the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. Now there's good reason to believe this might have some nuclear element. Is it possible that this is a man-made facility in space that functions on nuclear power? Maybe. It could just be something supernatural of God too. It could be a meteorological phenomenon. It could be an astronomical phenomenon. But verse 11 says, and the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, here's what's interesting about that. In the Russian language, and Ukrainian is to Russian as American English is to English. You might even say Afrikaner, where the Afrikaners talk like this in South Africa, and they write things here differently, but it's still English, and if you heard it speak, you can understand it, but it's not quite the same as normal Queen's English. That's how the difference is between Russian and Ukrainian. Russian, Dobry din, good morning. Ukrainian, it's a different way. My niece told me this because they had some Russians living with them, and they were Ukrainian, and it's just a different style, and she learned the good morning, and I told her that, and she wasn't happy because she learned something, and I should have just kept my mouth shut. But Russian and Ukrainian are basically the same as English, and American English and Australian English and Afrikaner are the same, even though they're different. Wormwood is Chernobyl. That's why I say that, because Chernobyl was in Ukraine. And when Chernobyl melted down, it was a Soviet installation in Ukraine. Even though Lenin gave Ukraine to the Ukrainians, Soviet Russia was an empire that had a bunch of surrounding countries. Even though Ukraine is Russia, it's not Russia, but it is. It's Constantinople, it's Istanbul. So the word Chernobyl harkens to wormwood root. And in the 80s, when the nuclear reactor melted down, the radiation poisoned the water and the land around there. Now, interestingly enough, if you go to Chernobyl's area today in Pripyat, which is the city where the Chernobyl nuclear facility melted down because of incompetence and a lack of resources in a communist state. It's always what happens in those sorts of government environments because it's a satanic pyramid scheme, but I digress. If you go there today, there's wildlife. A lot of it. It's probably got all kinds of cancer, but there's wildlife there. And there are people who are just too stubborn to leave, and who knows what they're dealing with. They're like, oh, look, I have tumor on my neck. I call him Bob. We are friends. There is no one else here. Me and Bob. We go hunt deer. I eat deer. I grow third nipple from my eyeball. It's great. It's my eye nip. I don't know. It's got to be weird. There's people still living there. You don't believe me? Go on YouTube, look it up. There's some interesting stuff that'll make you go, I don't think the tumor named Bob's on there. That was hyperbole. So Wormwood's very interesting, though. The water became bitter. We have an analog. It's not scriptural, but it does give us a vehicle to understand how a third of fresh water on the earth can become bitter. Third of the oceans, third of fresh water. So that's actually quite a bit of water. More ocean water was contaminated than fresh water, but we don't drink salt water. So the contamination of fresh water is really going to mess up them kings who are hiding under the ground asking the rocks to fall on them. And I think that's God's purpose here, but I don't know. I ain't God. This is just what he said is going to happen. Verse 12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So now that's interesting. So in chapter 6, the stars fell. But here we have a third part, as a fig tree casts off her figs. So maybe I'm not off in the high grass. Maybe that mountain falling into the sea did happen 2 chapters ago, and these 7 trumpets in some way are happening cotemporally with the seals, the 7 seals. I don't know. Perhaps this is the third part of the stars that remain. So there's clues here. I don't see contradiction. I see multiple facets of a jewel. So the more facets a jewel gets, the more light can be bounced around and the more things can be true at one time. So if you have just 3 faces, it's only so much, and then 4, and then 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's a lot of facets to this. It could be that this is taking place at the same time, simultaneously with chapter 6, and now we're getting more of an earthly perspective. It could also be that not all the stars fell in the removing of the seals, and a third of what remained is now no longer there. Could be a lot of things. Again, I won't be dogmatic about it, and I'm wary to trust those who are, because I don't think we can understand this, even if we have good intentions and we spend our whole life poring over each word in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek throughout the whole Bible, because it's designed from without time and space by the designer of all things, and not one jot or tittle shall pass away from my word until all things be fulfilled, said Christ. And the rabbis said, when the Messiah comes, he will interpret not only the words, but the spaces between the words, which tells me the integrity of Scripture is such that there is an endless depth of knowledge. And most people have no idea because they just think the book is a little moral pamphlet. They've never looked into it. They don't read this stuff. They don't have the time. People don't like to read. It's painful to think, like it's painful to exercise. But look at my forehead. I got abs from Proverbs. Just kidding. There's a meme going around with a guy who's got a thick forehead and it says, when you read Proverbs. I thought that was funny. Anyway. The third part of the sun was, let's see, the stars fell, yada, yada. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. That's very interesting. So a third of the day's gone. I wonder what that means. So it depends on what perspective we're looking at it from. If you have an impact from a nuclear facility, maybe a space station that had a nuclear plant and fell on waters in the north, corrupting a third of them. If you had an asteroid or a comet or a meteor hit the ocean so bad it KO'd a third of anything living where it hit, you're going to have some detritus in upper atmosphere. And that detritus in upper atmosphere is going to occlude starlight from the sun. So the question is, which side of the earth did this happen on? Because what is probably happening here, if it's somewhere, I don't know, if a third of the day is being blocked out, it strikes me that the destructive force has kicked up so much dust, particulates, debris, dead animals into the atmosphere, like Mount St. Helens, that there is a massive black weather pattern that just blocks out the sky, and it's so big that it seems like you lost a third of your day and a third of your night because of the earth rotating. This is actually, if you look at chapter 8, this is a very good case for a spherical earth. And of course, Scripture is centered on a spherical Earth because that's what God made. But a lot of flat earthers have been confused by a psyop that's designed to discredit people who take the Bible seriously. So they haven't looked into it that deep. But when you look at the destruction and the fallout from this destruction, it's clear that it only makes sense on a spherical Earth. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think we're seeing the fallout from the blazing star of Wormwood and the asteroid kicking up so many things into the upper atmosphere that it blocks out daylight, moonlight, and starlight. And if a third of the sea were hit, if you take into account how big the world is, I mean, we're talking about a hit that would take out a third of the day and the night with just the detritus. And of course, that much destruction is probably going to leave stuff burning. It's probably going to leave weather patterns swirling for a while. I mean, you've seen on Jupiter that big red storm that just continues forever and ever. There's such a thing as an event horizon where a reaction develops after that event horizon. It could be that we're seeing something like that. With an engine, you need enough fuel once the reaction is started and is constrained within the engine apparatus itself. If it keeps getting fuel at regular intervals, it's going to keep running until it runs out of fuel. There are natural processes like that, which are more and less complex. More complex in that they involve massive systems that develop a feedback loop. That's what I'm looking for. Less complex in that they weren't designed by the hand of man, they were designed by the hand of God. Our bodies are an example of that. There's a lot of feedback loops in biology. You know, the food is digested, which gives you energy, which makes you do things, which makes you hungry, which means you need more food. And as long as the cycle continues, you stay healthy. Within reason, entropy definitely breaks cellular structures down over time. So this looks very much to me like some sort of chain reaction that perpetuates a continuous situation is in place. I don't know for sure. I'm firing from the hip here. I think this is after the sixth seals because it begins with the seventh seal. So that would mean that there's an earthquake and then all the other stuff happens and then an asteroid and then the star. So that's three big events like that. And God does tend to work in 3s and 7s and 12s. Verse 13. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. Yeah! Makes me want to read 9 and see what they say. But we're going to do that tomorrow. 9's a long one. It's about a third again as long as chapter 8. A lot of thirds in chapter 8 for a chapter not divisible by 3. But then again, we know the chapters and verse headings were not actually added to the Bible until well after it had been canonized. So that's just a little detail. But yeah, so chapter 6, the seals. Chapter 7, we're talking about the 144,000 sealed out of Israel and the martyrs that'll get the white robes. And then chapter 8, the 7th seal is opened, and it's like, boom, 7 more woes, as it were. The 7 angels with the 7 trumpets, and I wonder where the next 7 is going to be in Revelation. So tomorrow, we're going to go over trumpets 5, 6, and 7, and yeah, these are intense. This is when stuff really starts getting funky. Yeah, and I'm just looking ahead a little bit here. Okay, so here's what it is. Chapters 1 through 11 deal with John and Christ and the epistles and that Christ gave John and how things looked from heaven looking down. And then chapter 12 to 22 seems to take the perspective from the earth, because that's where we get the revelation with the Antichrist and the woman who rides the beast and all that. And then we have the plagues and wrath of God as well. But if you look at chapter 11, then there's a reed where he's measuring the temple of God, the court without. Actually, I think chapter 11 is where the turn comes, because in chapter 11 we have the two witnesses. So, chapters 1 through 10... Chapters 1 through 10 seem to be looking at these events from heaven, whereas chapters 11 through 22 are looking at them from earth. Again, it's not linear. All right, sorry, didn't mean to delay that long. Thanks for following with me. Please look into this stuff yourself. A few people have already commented. Tell me what you think it might be, and shoot, you might teach me something. Somebody commented earlier that the 7 pillars in the Old Testament might be like the 7 spirits or the 7 stars or the 7 candlesticks. It's possible in context the 7 pillars in Proverbs had to do with architectural soundness, 1, 2, 3, and then in the middle 7, boom, you're held out here, you're held here, and then that one in the middle keeps anything from sagging down there. To determine specific pillars of God, you have to be a bit eisegetical. You have to read into the text what it doesn't expressly say. Exegesis is pulling out of the text. Eisegesis, however you want to say it, is reading into the text. So the 7 pillars of God, those are a good sermon, but the text doesn't expressly say that things like riches and honor are God's aspects. They could be. I'm not disputing that. However, from my reading of Proverbs in that verse that was mentioned in another comment, I didn't get that sense. Could be, though. I could be totally wrong on that. I'd love it if anybody knows any other 7 aspects of God that are mentioned in the Old Testament, because I seem to have missed them. The only place I notice them is in the book of Revelation. I don't know where it says the 7 spirits of God anywhere else, but I'm sure they're in there, and that may be it, the 7 pillars. But I did not catch that connotation when I read that passage about wisdom having made her 7 pillars for her house. That seemed to me like Solomon speaking to the reader about proper architecture, and wisdom being like a proper architect in its personification. Because wisdom isn't obviously a conscious individual, Solomon was speaking as though it were in order to paint a picture to give oblique understanding in a sort of backhanded way. C.S. Lewis talks about obliqueness. People understand things better obliquely when it's not direct, because when it's directly put in front of you, the mind starts thinking about it in a way that immediately produces contradictions and arguments and things like that. And so you can't really understand something when it's put right in front of you, because you immediately start filtering what you see through your own conscious opinions. Whereas when something is presented obliquely through showing rather than telling, then you ingest that and you start thinking about what that means as a consequence after the fact. And then you're more likely to get closer to the truth of what that person's trying to say. And God understands this about the human psyche, which is why he presents these things like this, so that though directly presented, the oblique aftertaste is what your soul goes away with. And that's the intent here, I think. All right, I'll see you tomorrow with number 9. God bless you.